All right, Michael, can you hear me?
I can.
We can hear you. Hooray, we're in. It
Woohoo!
worked.
We made it.
The trials and tribulations of the modern internet world, right?
I know. I must apologize to everybody here in attendance. Sorry about that. That was 100% Michael Breus' fault. No fault of Diamond Dave Raven.
Oh, you're too kind. Last time, if anybody saw our last webinar, I was in Michael's position, just being like, "Why will you let me in?"
Exactly.
Um, well, let's kick things off then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome everyone to another exciting Apollo neuroscience webinar.
Yeah.
I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Breus. Michael Breus is a very impressive fellow. He is a double board certified clinical psychologist and clinical sleep specialist. He's one of the few, I think, worldwide, and he's a diplomat of the American Board of Sleep Medicine and an esteemed member of the Apollo Neuro Scientific Advisory Board. He is one of my favorite people to talk to because not only is he a world-renowned sleep expert, but he is just an awesome communicator and somebody who can really distill complex ideas down into really easy, understandable forms that is a real skill. And really helps us to understand and take in stuff that really helps us live better lives and, as he would say, be better in bed, which
There you
what could be more
go.
important than that, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for taking this time out of your day, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. First of all, everybody should know, like, I'm on the advisory board of Apollo, and there's some specific reasons why I wanted to be on the advisory board of Apollo. Is it okay, Dave, if I take a minute here okay. So, I get approached on a very regular basis by all kinds of companies who've got all kinds of things that they think are going to actually help people sleep. And as many of you know, I'm a data-driven doctor, right? Much the way Dr. Dave is. I'm always looking for people who've got real science, who really want to help people and really understand what it is that they're doing, whether it's through a product, through a procedure, through a method, whatever it happens to be. And when I got approached by Dr. Dave and we started really getting into the science of it, I'm just going to be straight up honest with you. I was amazed. Like, I really hadn't seen anybody really take the time to start to understand what's going on in our autonomic nervous system. How can we affect that? And then, even more interesting, how does something like that have a tendency to affect sleep? And so we got into some great discussions. I mean, we got into some, what are you, crazy? Are you serious? Did the data really say that kind of discussions? And it was lots of fun, and it always is. We always get together and have a great time. And it was really good to trade those ideas and really start to understand more about what Apollo does. And here's the thing. Apollo doesn't seem to fall into any neat category out there, right? It's not a tracker, it's not a this, it's not a that. It's really a unique device unto itself. And so that also attracted me because there isn't anybody really doing this. Historically, when I look at devices, whether it's, something that you wear or something, that is attached underneath your bed or something along those lines, you're always wondering, like, well, where did the idea come from? What were they trying to accomplish? And
Oh,
where were they trying to go with this? And we want to help people not have burnout. We want to help us, because let's be fair, that's kind of the big, for me, being able to have my Apollo, which, by the way, I've been using now for almost 3 years, has really been beneficial. For me personally, I've actually seen my heart rate variability rise, which I was having a hell of a time trying to get that thing to rise. So that was really very helpful. But I've also instituted it in some patients. And over the course of our discussion today, I'll get a chance to tell you a few stories of some people that I've been able to use it for. And it's been pretty cool. So I'm excited to have this discussion today. And I just want to say thanks for having me.
of course, it's always a pleasure. And those are my favorite stories. So I really do hope we can get into those. It's always great to hear when other clinicians have used Apollo with patients and had good responses. So I just want to ground everybody with some quick webinar rules for those who are new to our Apollo webinars, because we do want to answer all your questions.
Yeah.
That being said, we are doctors. We are not your doctor. So we can't answer personal medical questions for you. If you would like to have personal medical questions answered for you, please feel free to reach out to us directly, and you can set up an appointment, and we are more than happy to do it, or we can set you up with a colleague. That being said, if you have general questions about the way the body works, the way our sleep systems work, circadian rhythms, anything like that, we are more than happy to answer it. Also note that because we are doctors, but not your doctor, do not take this as personal medical advice. This is just us sharing our knowledge of the field with you so that you can take it in and have a better understanding of sleep and health overall, and why these tools can be really important to giving you better sleep and better focus and just better functioning on your nights and days. So with that, also, please use the Q&A box. If you have questions, don't throw them in the chat, throw them in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can by the end of this. So with that, Michael, I think just to be timely, right? Sure. You're a sleep rhythms guy, which is something that I really appreciate about you, because not a lot of people really have dove into tackling and really characterizing the different rhythms around sleep, and how some of us, actually have different rhythms. We don't all have the same circadian sleep or sleep and wake cycles, which we call circadian rhythms, which are some of the most important rhythms that we all have during the day, which really means, the timing on which we wake up, and that cycles with nature, and then the timing that we're best to functioning, and the timing that we wind down and go to bed. And we had a disruption to that recently, right? Because just the other day, daylight savings time happens. How does that affect us? What kinds of things do we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about the impact of daylight savings?
So first of all, I want to be clear. I think daylight savings is about the stupidest idea in the universe these days. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine has come out and actually agreed with me on this. Here's the thing is, daylight savings was originally an invention to make more money, to be able to get people to work more and be able to be more involved in commerce. It was not based on health or science. Our original development of what we call standard time is actually based on our own health. And here's the thing, we don't like people waking up in the darkness. We like it when people wake up in the light. That's how our bodies were created, because when we open up our eyes, when sunlight is able to hit, it turns off the melatonin faucet and it allows us to start our day. So as a general guideline, there's not a sleep doctor in the universe that likes daylight savings time, to be clear. But here's the good news is, yes, this past weekend, we did gain an extra hour, which is awesome. And so here's the even better news. You don't have to do a damn thing. All you get to do is lean back and get a little bit more sleep, because you're probably sleep deprived. And I wanted people to go to bed at their normal bedtime, not an hour later, right? Because a lot of people are like, ooh, I get an extra hour tonight. No. Go and use that hour for yourself and be able to gain a little bit extra sleep. The good news here is, if you were thinking about it in a different way, like how does it affect my circadian rhythm, which was the question that Dr. Dave asked, then what you need to understand is your body will naturally adjust for one time zone every day. So when we move back an hour or forward an hour, it's like moving one time zone. So our bodies will naturally do this in one day. Here's an interesting historical fact is, we used to do daylight savings way back when on Sundays. And then it turned out that Mondays, on the time in March when we lose the hour, that Monday was the #1 day for car accidents in the United States.
Wow.
Which is kind of fascinating when you think about it, right? And so fortunately, some brilliant soul said, hey, let's switch it to Saturday instead of Sunday. So we didn't have to have as many, God forbid, bad things happening. But we do know that it has an effect, especially on the time when we lose that hour of sleep. And I would argue for two real reasons. One is we shift people out of their circadian rhythm. The other is we're already a really sleep deprived society. And so I think that so many people are already not getting enough high quality sleep. It just has a tendency to make it worse. But again, the good news is this past one, no sweat. As long as you didn't, tie one on and stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning on the night of the time change, you're probably going to be okay.
That's good to know. And actually, I didn't know that about the business case for daylight savings. That actually makes a lot more sense and explains a heck of a lot, especially the start on Sunday and then the transition to Saturday.
Right.
And it really makes me think, because one of the things that, thinking about, you're talking about the addition or reduction of an hour, right, on a
Right.
Sunday, causing or resulting in more car accidents on that following Monday than any other time.
Correct.
Right.
And I want to highlight that in particular because it's kind of an interesting statistic. And I think what you're leading me to is the idea of what types of people will losing that hour have a bigger effect on versus a smaller effect on. So let's talk about that for just a second. So as an example, when you lose an hour and you're a night owl like me, what I like to call a wolf, it's much worse than if you're an early bird who's normally already getting up much earlier. So we do also think that chronotypes, what my area of study is, as Dr. Dave was saying, I'm a rhythm guy, meaning I don't dance well, but what I do talk about are circadian rhythms. And this is an area where circadian can have a big effect. So just like if you were traveling across the country and you had an effect there, you could have an effect here, especially if you're going in reverse of your chronotype. So as an example, a night owl would love what just happened because they get that extra hour of sleep because they really could use it. Whereas an early bird, it may not mean nearly as much. They might wake up even earlier than normal, just again, because their body is used to going to bed early and waking up early. So there are people that have worse effects depending upon which one it is. And then the other case that's interesting are infants. Infants are a tough one. Those little suckers, they don't move as quickly as we do. And so if you've ever traveled with a baby, even just across the United States, you'll learn really fast that if they don't want to change their clocks, they have a tendency not to. And so it seems to take closer to 2 days per time zone. That's been my personal experience. I don't have data for that one, but that's been my personal experience in that area.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, anecdotally, and from all of my colleagues and friends who have children, that their kids are always, especially the younger kids, but even maybe not even just infants, but like 2 or 3 and younger, they always are about a day behind the parents, or even 2 days behind sometimes, which is really interesting. And this is a great way to sound smart in front of your friends, right? Is if you remember that word circadian rhythm for sleep and wake cycles, right? This is a very old term that is very, very important term in all of our daily lives about how we just simply about, how we regulate our sleep and wake cycles over time. And that impacts us and the way we feel and our energy levels and our quality of sleep and also our kids. And that if you can remember that 1 hour or one time zone per day, that's a very simple math equation that will allow you to help understand how to make sure that you're feeling rested and restored when you get back from a trip or a vacation or something like that, and that you're not surprised when your kids aren't.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and it's funny that you mentioned it. So one of the things that we do in our household as like a strategic tip is we end almost all of our vacations on Saturdays, not Sundays. So we fly home on a Saturday. Number one, it's easier flying because it's not nearly as crowded when flying on Saturdays. But once we hit our home time zone, we give ourselves that extra Sunday to relax and adjust. And it makes Mondays so much easier. I know people are like, oh, but you're missing out on Saturday night fun and wherever the vacation spot is that you are. But, at the end of the day, then take Monday off, right? If you come home on Sunday, but giving yourself that day break for your body to readjust can be very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a great tip. And Apollo for me has really shifted the way that I adjust to time zones, because it helps me to give me a little boost of staying energized to push through if I need to stay up, or to wind me down and give me a little more rest on the plane if I need to catch up on sleep during travel or something like that. So it actually helps me kind of keep my rhythms more aligned, which is really nice, which before I was just kind of relying on myself and my breathing techniques to get me through, which, sometimes when I'm stressed out, they just don't work that well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I like, so I do the same thing. I use the energy one for wake up and then the relax one for going to sleep, especially when I'm traveling. Also, by the way, this is great for napping as well, because if you're on an intercontinental flight, there are going to be certain times where you're going to want to sleep and certain times where you're going to want to be awake. Otherwise, you're really going to mess yourself up. So I've actually found great utility in using the Apollo that way for me, because it helps kind of re-energize me or chill me out. It's literally like an on-off switch sometimes, depending upon, kind of how you utilize it. I would also argue, but I have no data to prove this, that you could probably, it would be easiest to time travel, if you will, domestically using the Apollo. If you're going to be going 8, 9 time zones, I would argue that you probably want to have an additional plan along with the Apollo that I think could be helpful. In those situations where we've got long jaunts, you really need to understand things like light therapy, melatonin, and different ways to use it. But this becomes a great adjunct as well. And to be fair, I've personally used it all over the world, and that's kind of what I use it for sometimes.
Yeah, that's definitely a major help to have tools like that. The light therapy as well is like a big one, because light is so important to help us regulate our rhythms. And I think, before we jump deep into rhythms and chronotypes, because I think it's really important for people to understand this, and this is a big focus of your work. Going back to this impact of 1 hour, right? It's really interesting. Because most people think about an hour of sleep more or less, and they're like, wow, that's a lot. Like, I would love that, but we don't necessarily understand how much impact that has, like increasing the number of car accidents in a day to the most in a year, right? That's huge, because that's showing that just that 1 hour is dramatically impacting our judgment and our ability to be aware of our environment and make decisions on the fly when we're doing something we do every day, like driving a car, right? And so, we've been getting a lot of questions today, which we're going to address later, but I thought it was important to jump into, which is, how do you use Apollo for getting the best sleep and boosting HRV? Because getting good sleep is one of the biggest reasons why we get HRV improvements, heart rate variability improvements. And what we've seen from the ongoing studies now in 1,500 people, but you can see the preliminary data in 582 people on our website, which our team will share in the chat, is that with just 3 hours or more of wearing Apollo on your body, a little bit during the day, a little bit at night, 5 days or more a week, what we see is that people are getting 25 to 30 minutes more sleep a night, up to 35 minutes more sleep a night. That's concentrated in deep and REM sleep, which is really interesting. Yeah. So when you think about that in the context of what you're saying, right? Now you're talking 3.5 hours of extra sleep a week, right? And that hour, losing an hour, can cause that many car accidents. I'm thinking, like, imagine how much clearer we could think on a daily basis with just a half hour, more sleep a night.
Well, and to even put an exclamation point on it, here's the thing that a lot of people don't know, is if you look up Ambien, the sleep aid, and you look up exactly how much extra sleep it gives you, it's 23 minutes roughly, okay? 23 minutes.
Not deeper.
Right. And by the way, you have to take a pill every night of your life in order for that to actually occur. So we're not, and I want to also be clear about one other thing, Dave, and you know this, but I'm fearful that many of the participants may not know this. Pharmaceutically induced sleep and natural sleep are two different animals, period, end of story. I don't really care. We can have the argument in any way, shape, or form people want to, but I can tell you this. I can walk into a sleep laboratory, I can look at the EEG on the screen, and I can tell you if somebody's on a sleeper or not, right? That's because it changes your fundamental EEG waveforms. That's different than what we're talking about here. Good news, Apollo doesn't do anything even remotely like that. In fact, it works with your body functions, with your rhythms, and with your waveforms to actually make them stronger. And that's how we see this HRV start to increase, which I think is actually pretty phenomenal. So yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer sometimes for folks, but at the end of the day, a lot of people haven't been exposed to this type of technology, right? But I want to be clear about one other thing here. If you're listening to this and you're taking a sleeping tablet right now, do not go cold turkey off of your sleeping tablet and say that I'm going to use this. That is not what we're discussing here, okay, at all. That's a conversation for you and your doctor. But by the way, if you want to have that conversation, you should. You should talk to your doctor and say, you know what? I was watching this webinar and these guys are talking about this new technology that might actually be better for me than a sleeping pill. I've got a news flash for you. There's not a physician in the country that wouldn't want you to be off of Ambien and onto something that's naturalistic and non-pharmaceutical for sleep. So I think there's a lot of utility in just thinking about it in those terms as well.
For sure. And with that, unlike Ambien, you won't have any risk of accidentally waking up in the middle of the night and sleep driving or sleep eating.
Yeah, or baking a cake,
refrigerator, right?
Right. Cooking some eggs, traveling across town. I mean, there's some pretty funky stuff that people do. on those medications. And to be clear, we're not pill shaming anybody. We're not saying anything. Like, there are people in the world who need a pill to sleep, but if you aren't one of those people and you need help sleeping, it might be better to not use a pill.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth having these conversations with your doctor, because there are options. I think a lot of us forget. I think that's what Dr. Breus, Dr. Breus and I are saying, is that we see people of all kinds, some on medication, some not, some who like medication, some who don't. But the point is, there are options, and it's good for everybody to know that you have access to those options. And if you are interested in trying something different, Apollo or breath work or light therapy or anything, you should talk to your doctor about it, because medications can be helpful, but they don't increase your quality of sleep. Right. And they do have side effects that are very well understood.
Yeah. And also, the other thing that people don't realize is sometimes those medications interact with other medications that you might be taking. Whereas, I'm pretty sure there's no interaction effects of this.
Well, so I think, but this is a great segue, right? Because one of the things we're going to talk about now is rhythms, and medications are interesting because, they have their place when somebody's having a really, really hard time. They might have a seizure disorder that's preventing them from getting sleep, or they might have, anxiety or panic disorder where there's no other thing that's working for them and they desperately need to get sleep, or they're going through a grieving process for a couple weeks because of a loss. They need to get sleep, right? These are very real situations where medications, like the sleep medicines we're talking about, can be very helpful. And yet they often also, alcohol not being a medicine, but being a substance that works similarly, tend to throw off our circadian rhythms, our sleep and wake cycles. Right. You, Michael, have really done a lot of interesting work to characterize these sleep and wake cycles in different ways. And they're called chronotypes. Could you explain that a little bit for
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what we're talking about here, guys and gals, is this word called chronotypes. Now, you might not have heard of this big fancy word, but you've definitely heard of the concept before. If anybody out there has ever been called an early bird or a night owl, those are chronotypes. So my contribution to the literature is I found a fourth chronotype. So back in the 70s, a group of researchers came up with this idea called morningness versus eveningness. And this was a questionnaire. Now, I want to be clear about something. There have been chronotypes since the dawn of time. It just happened to be in the 70s. These gentlemen got together and put it into a questionnaire. But I can show you data where hunter-gatherers had chronotypes, early birds, night owls, and people in between. And that's kind of what we were thinking about. By the way, if you want to think about it that way, the early birds back in the hunter-gatherer days, those were the hunters. They went out before dawn, speared something, brought it back to the village. Who minded the village? Well, those were the people in between, what we called hummingbirds for a while. Then if you looked at who was the security force to watch out for the village, those were the night. They were up anyway, hand them a spear and let's go, right? So like that makes intuitive sense. And those three categories of people we've known about for quite some time. My contribution is I found a fourth one. So it's interesting, but it turns out this is genetic. And so you don't actually get to choose if you get to be an early bird or a night owl, although there are a lot of books out there that seem to think that everybody needs to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to have a productive lifestyle. I'm here to tell you that's not true. I'm a night owl myself, often called a wolf. And I am not one of those people who has to get up at 5 a.m. every day. But what we discovered is there was an irregular sleep pattern that really dovetailed nicely with insomnia. So all of a sudden, I was looking on this area of the human genome called the PER3 access point. And on that access point, what we discovered is some of the building blocks were a little longer, some were a little shorter. The longer ones mean you're a night owl. The shorter ones mean you're an early bird. And then we started to notice there was a normal one, which was kind of in the middle, but there was a weird one where there was some jumbling and some irregular patterns. So I ended up with 4 different avatars or understandings of these top possible chronotypes. So you'll appreciate this, Dave, and I think you might have heard me tell this story before, but when we were in the publishing, when I was with the publishing group and we were sitting there, I've got these 4 categories. How do we want people to identify? One person said, how about crystals? One person said, how about colors? So I decided I wanted animals, and I wanted animals that actually represented the chronorhythmicity that they are actually with. So early birds turn into lions, because let's be honest, who wouldn't want to be the king or queen of the jungle, right? And lions really do get up before dawn for their first kill. In the middle are called bears. That makes up, believe it or not, 55% of the population. So the majority of people out there are bears. And I want to be honest with you, I wish I was a bear, bro. Like there's nothing, I mean, I'm a night owl, also known as a wolf, and it's never been easy for me. It's been hard. Like, I mean, think about it. When you're in medical school and things like that, it's like nobody gives a crap if you're a night owl. Class starts at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, you know, for anatomy or whatever it is, and you're in, and that's what you got to do. And so I was told I was lazy my entire life because I was not a morning person. I'm pretty sure I'm not lazy. But I would honestly tell you that, you know, that's kind of one of those detriments to these things. The fourth category we call dolphins, and they represent my insomniacs. And to be fair, they make up roughly 10% of the population. So the good news is that you can go over to chronoquiz.com and figure out which one you are, and take the quiz and then start to learn all about how you can utilize these chronotypes to your advantage. Now, one of the best parts that I've been able to learn partnering with Apollo is how to use my Apollo in conjunction with my chronotype to help me actually do things even better. So as an example, what we've learned throughout this entire process is, like, if you're an early bird or a lion, you can set your Apollo at your profile times when you know you've already going to have high energy to be able to give you even more energy, or even better, know at times when you're going to have low energy and then come in with the energize, and boom, now you're back up to where you need to be. So there's lots of different ways I've had patients utilize the technology to push themselves in one direction or another based on their basic chronorhythmicity, which is, again, your chronotype.
So I really appreciate that explanation, because that really breaks it down for people. And I think this ties into a question that we get all the time, which is, well, what happens when you're a shift worker, right? What happens when you're somebody who works a normal schedule, but then you have 3-5 days where you have to go off your rhythm and then come back? So what's the best way for people to navigate that? And then how can Apollo help?
Okay, so to be clear, shift work is a whole different ball game. I want to be very honest with you. There are actually sleep specialists where all they do is look at shift work and create these shift schedules. I am not one of them, but I have a decent amount of knowledge and I've worked with these before. So I feel confident that I can give some general guidelines, but I want to be clear. There are some websites out there that are really good at this, and or some apps that are good at this. One that's called Time Shifter is a friend of ours. His name is Mickey Beyer-Clausen, and he actually creates these, helps you create shifts so that you know what time to wake up, what time to go to bed. But here's the problem, is sometimes those don't work because your boss calls you at 9 o'clock and says, somebody didn't come in. And even though it's not your shift tonight, get your butt in here because I need you, right? What do you do in those situations? I think that's where something like an Apollo can be very helpful, because if you were planning on going in one direction and you need to be pushed in another direction, that's one of the things that I would argue that Apollo does well, whether it's energy or sleep, right? So you could be in the situation where you get called off of work, right? And so you're about ready to go in for your 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. shift. And at 7:45, your boss calls and said, hey, we don't need you tonight. And you're like, well, what am I going to do? Stay up all night at my house, right? That becomes a problem. So that's where, again, you can start to utilize something like this to help you out. As a general guideline, looking at shift work, a few things for people to know and understand. It's easier to go around the clock clockwise than it is to go counterclockwise for your biology. What that means is if you have a morning shift, it's easier for your body to move to an afternoon or evening shift than it is if you're a morning shift to move to a night shift immediately. See what I'm saying is you want to move only one, and you want to do it in a clockwise fashion. So if you have a mid shift, you can move to a night shift, not necessarily back to a morning shift. So working in that clockwise direction usually helps people quite a bit. The other thing is consistency. So if you are in a shift and somebody says, okay, you're going to work Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., say, excuse me, is there a universe where I can work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at that shift? Because when you have a day off in between shifts and you try to flip-flop back and forth, that's when the madness happens. I also want to be very clear about it is when you try to do that, you definitely lower immune function. And I'd be honest with you, we all need all the immune function we can freaking get right now. So I would tell you that if you're working on a shift Number one, talk with your boss and say, hey, there are healthier ways to do this. And that is, again, by following the clock in a clockwise fashion and consolidating the times when you're going to be in opposition to what you would consider to be your normal sleep schedule, right? So if you're normally sleeping from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning, and now you have to be awake during that period of time, that's when you want to have consistency, because if you try to flip-flop back and forth, it's a mess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that there's also something that, people forget, which is, what you put into your body also matters, right? I was just having a wonderful conversation with our colleague, Dr. Nicole Berkins.
She's amazing.
She's amazing. And she is a nutritionist and a clinical psychologist, which is a rare combination. And, she was talking about how important it is to be mindful of what we're putting into our bodies, especially not just in the morning, but also in the afternoon and in that pre-bedtime. Because, for instance, simple thing that you and I talk about all the time, right? Don't drink too much liquid before bed.
Right.
We just got this question today from a participant. If you drink too much liquid before bed, you will wake up at night having to use the bathroom.
No question.
Right? That's easy.
This is one of my favorite things that people tell me. They call me up, or I'll be seeing them as a patient. They'll say, and I'll say, hey, how's your hydration? They'll be like, oh, Dr. Breus, don't you worry. Here's what I do. If I don't drink my X amount during the day, 10 minutes before bed, I slug a bunch of water. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the worst idea in the universe, okay? Because all you're gonna have to do is wake up and pee. So make it part of your morning routine to start out hydrating. As an example, one of those things that you can do throughout the day that can really give you better sleep at night. And a lot of people don't think of it that way, but Dave and I have had a lot of discussions about this, and we start preparing for bed right after we wake up. Right. And so what does that mean? That means doing things like getting direct sunlight early in the morning to slow down that melatonin faucet that's in your head, right? That's taking 15 deep breaths to wake up your respiratory system in the morning time, right? But that's also hydrating throughout the day. That's moving your body throughout the day, so that way your body doesn't get stiff. And we know that exercise is certainly one of those things that helps people with sleep. So thinking about sleep throughout the daytime in little simple ways can be very advantageous. Now, I want to be also honest with people sounds like we're talking about a lot of stuff that people have to do. And like, holy cow, Michael, how am I supposed to remember to do this, when, here, and that, and what? Here's the best part. You create a profile and then you don't think about it again. And as soon as, I learned that was, an aspect of what was going on here, I was like, perfect. I'll be honest with you guys. I don't have the time to follow a lot of these rules. And so it's great to have something that kind of follows the rules for me. And allows that to happen in the background. That way I don't have to be thinking and worrying about it. I can just kind of set it and go.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? That this is, and also we record all these webinars and we'll post them and email them out to you. So if you forget anything, don't worry, you'll be able to come back and watch it. But to your point, there is a lot to remember because we weren't taught this as kids, and it's not harder. We can learn things as adults. I know this not only from my research in neuroscience and the adult aging brain, but also because my father in his late 70s has actually taught himself how to play piano in the last few years, and he plays better than me. And I took lessons for 10 years and I'm blown away. So it really is possible to learn new stuff. And I think that it just takes a little more effort, and that's okay, because it's actually that constant learning process that we engage in that actually challenges our brain to grow. If we don't challenge our brains to grow and we don't try to learn new stuff, including about how to sleep better and how to, regulate our rhythms better, our brain's like, oh, you're not using me anymore. Well, I guess I don't need it. So I'm just going to exit stage left. Right. And that's not good for anyone. So, but I think that to your point, there are certain things about our sleep and wake cycles, our circadian rhythms, that are very challenging to put into practice when we did not learn them as children. We didn't have that structure. We didn't have those routines. We didn't learn the breathing techniques. We didn't learn the beauty of the wind down, right? It's hard. And we didn't learn to start thinking about sleep when we wake up. And so one of the tools that and part of why we created this scheduling feature in Apollo, which is the single best way that anybody can use Apollo and get the best results, which is actually something I posted here, and our team will post it again, is the scheduling link and the how to get the most out of Apollo link on our website, is that if you schedule your Apollo, then all the stuff that Michael and I are talking about here, Apollo will start to do for you. And it will start to help you balance your sleep and wake cycles the way you want to, so that when you are waking up in the morning, you wake up with energy, then you stay energized during the day. And during the morning, instead of maybe going for that cup of coffee right when you wake up, you actually feel energized enough that you might not need it. And if you drink, 1 cup of coffee in the morning instead of 3 throughout the morning and afternoon,
progress.
It's incredible progress. Like, you may not realize it, but the chances that you're going to need a sedative like alcohol or a sleep medicine at night to fall asleep goes way down, because you don't have tons of caffeine on board when you're winding down to go to bed. And believe it or not, that caffeine sticks around. There was a study that came out and same with stimulants like amphetamines or even Sudafed, which is sold over the counter. These are stimulants that are very, very potent that stick around throughout the whole day up until when you go to bed. And there was a big study that came out, I think it was published in The Lancet, in a very famous medical journal in England several years ago, that showed that something like 80% of people who take a stimulant, including coffee in the morning, take a sedative at night to fall asleep, right? And you think about what that means.
That's not good, brother.
Yeah, that means I don't know if anyone here remembers who Elvis is, but that means like we're all on the Elvis diet. Like, we're all taking drugs to wake up, and we're taking drugs to fall asleep. And those don't have to be prescription drugs. It can be recreational drugs, but we are off our rhythms, right? And then our bodies do not feel good, and it takes a toll.
And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because the other day I actually saw a commercial for a drugstore chain, and it said, yeah, you can get your energy drink in the morning and your melatonin at night from us. And I was like, that's the worst thing for your health I've ever freaking seen, but that's how a lot of people are thinking, is I need this to do this. You don't. Okay. Your body can do 3 things on its own better than any other thing out there. It can breathe, it can hydrate, and it can sleep. Okay. Those are the natural consequences that your body has to do in order for this unit to keep going. Believe it or not, you can go without food for almost 30 days. Okay. And I've seen people go a lifetime without exercise. So when you start to really think about, the biggie things that are going on here, that is what Apollo is trying to affect. That's what I'm trying to affect as well, is just getting people to understand that it's not that complicated. Wellness doesn't have to be this unbelievable, holy shit, I've got to do 12 different things all day long type of scenario. It's literally about just understanding this unit and how it works, and being able to work with your body as opposed to against it.
Yep, you said it. And that's why I appreciate your work so much.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, it's nice to have people who are, fighting the good fight for better sleep.
Well, and it's it's one of those things that's been kind of a forgotten situation. And I say this all the time. You've heard me say this a million times. People use sleep as the shock absorber of their life, right? So it's like, oh, I'm having a crappy day at work, I'm just going to stay up and work more. Or, oh, I got into a fight with my spouse, I'm going to go to bed early to avoid them. It's like, why don't you just go to sleep? Do that natural thing and enjoy that process and allow your body to recover. Right. That's the thing that's always so interesting to me, right? Is everybody understands sleep is healing. Sleep is recovery. Why would you ever want to do anything to cheat your body of either one of those things? Right.
Yeah, because we need to recover to perform. They're not isolated things, right? You can't expect, like, if you just keep burning a candle at both ends, you're gonna run out of wax, guys. Like, you gotta give yourself back something. It's also, this is again an ancient Eastern technique, tradition that's been around for thousands of years. It's the yin and yang, right? What you put out has to be balanced with what you take in, and we have to have that balance to live happy, healthy lives. And that being said, I think there's a couple of really interesting questions that are coming in. I think one of them that I think is hard to understand for a lot of people is how we lose the ability to sleep in certain respects as we age, or certain parts of our sleep cycle change as we age. Could you explain that a little bit for people?
Absolutely. But I realized I didn't really answer your last question, which was about food and sleep.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I wanted to double down just a little bit and go backwards for just a second,
Please.
Which is, well, the 2 areas that we needed to really focus in on in that are caffeine and alcohol. right? Because those are the biggies that have tremendous effects on sleep. Those effects should be pretty obvious. But here's the thing to remember. Alcohol is the #1 sedative in the world, and it's the worst one that we have. More people drink themselves to sleep, and it's really not good for you to do that. That's not what alcohol was around for, and it really destroys stage 3, 4 sleep. So you really have to be thoughtful in that. There are some things, by the way,
Stage 3, 4 being the good stuff.
Sorry, yeah, the physically restorative sleep. That's why you get a hangover, by the way, is you get knocked out of stage 3, 4 sleep, and that's why you feel like, crap when you wake up. The other reason is hydration, right? And thinking through that whole idea of hydration is really the third aspect of food that should be monitored for sleep. But there are some actual foods that are very good for sleep. Believe it or not, tart cherries have got high levels of melatonin in them. There's some data to show that tart cherry juice can be something that you can have. Nuts like pistachios, walnuts, those are high in melatonin. But to be fair, you don't need to eat 2 bags of pistachios before bed. Okay, like I want to be clear about that.
It'll make you real hot.
That would not be good. Metabolically speaking, that would be disgusting. But you know what I'm saying? At the end of it all, thinking through just general guidelines for food, I think can be very valuable. Now let's get back to the other point at hand, which were some of the questions that we had. You said there was a question in particular you wanted to say. Oh, what happens as we age?
Aging,
yeah. So good news, bad news. Okay. If you're a healthy person in your midlife, then you will be a reasonably healthy person in your elder life. And that has to do with sleep. But if you're not paying attention to your sleep from the ages of 30 to 50, I can assure you that the sleep from 55 plus is going to suck. It's just how it works. And so like anything in the body, we see these systems will over the course of time be mutated or break down in some way, shape, or form. And so a couple of things that happen when you hit the 50 to 55 plus age range. And just to let you all know, I'm 54 years old. I'll be 55 in February. So I'm cruising right into this. So this is of high value to me as well. That's why I've been looking into it and studying it. One of the things we know is that melatonin actually slows down in production as we get older. And what I mean by that is that the amount and the timing of melatonin appears to change. So you ever notice from your grandparents where you ask them, hey, grandma, do you want to go for dinner? And they say, yeah, let's go have dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon. That's because her melatonin is earlier and her internal biological clock has moved that earlier. So that's number one, is the timing changes, but also the amount of melatonin changes. Interestingly, in the sleep laboratories, we actually had to change the criteria for scoring people who were over the age of 60 because the amplitude of the waveforms shrinks as you get older, meaning the power of your brain waves in sleep is different when you're 13 than when you're 63, right? And so those are the types of things we can expect. A couple of other things that are not so fun, awakenings seem to occur on a more frequent basis as we get older. Also, obstructive sleep apnea. As we gain weight, people can get obstructive sleep apnea. This is an issue. So for folks out there who don't understand what sleep apnea is, if you snore, if you stop breathing in your sleep, if anybody's seen that happen, you wake up with a headache, talk to your doctor. That is a serious situation. Everybody at Apollo wants you to get that fixed. I can assure you of that. Other things that we notice that occur as we get older is medical frailty picks up. And so people become more medically frail, meaning they've got more problems, they've got more prescriptions, and those can have an effect on your sleep. So it really kind of pays to really be knowledgeable and take care of this unit that you call your body in the earlier stages, because as we get older, it can definitely have some challenges. Now, one thing I will tell you that I use, and I don't know if I told you about this, Dave, is I had a patient, an elderly patient who was really fading earlier and earlier, and we actually got him an Apollo, and we actually helped them get energy earlier in the day. So we did the energize one at like 4 o'clock, and all of a sudden she was up and ready to go, and so she didn't have to eat right then, and we could push her circadian schedule so that it kind of met her grandchildren's bedtime, because that was the goal. Is she wanted to be able to stay awake long enough to be able to hang out with the grandchildren. So that was one way. I don't think I told you that story. That was one way that we worked with somebody to make it happen. So again, there's interesting things that you can do as you age and as you start to learn more. But if you're not aware and if you're not thinking about your sleep, you should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, I've worked with a lot of elderly folks who are in that population of 65 plus, that where their sleep quality and sleep duration starts to decline, or they start sleeping more during the day and then being up more at night, which some people are totally fine with, by the way. As long as you're feeling rested, you can, as far as I'm concerned, I think, and you would probably say the same, Michael, you know, you could sleep whenever you want if you have that flexibility in your life. But then there are some people who really don't like that, or it's very inconveniencing to them. And so using tools like Apollo, so you can use music, right, and different meditation techniques to help you get, or even increasing physical activity at certain times of the day can help you get the energy you want when you want the energy, but then also make sure that you're ready to wind down when you're ready to wind down.
Yeah, and the one caveat I would say, based on what you just said, is don't be sleeping whenever you want if you have insomnia in the evening time, because that will lower that sleep drive and make it even more difficult to do that. That's when using an Apollo to keep you energized during the daytime, like that 1 to 3 in the afternoon time, which is always a killer for most people. That's when you can actually, instead of napping, use something like Apollo for clear and focused, or open and social. And that way you're up and ready without being so energized. And that kind of helps carry you through the daytime. So again, if you're no problems taking naps as you get older, but if you do have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep in the evening time, better to consolidate all that sleep into one large bout at night, and then use other tools and techniques during the daytime.
One of the things that we often get asked is, how much melatonin should I take? Right. Most of my patients come to me and they're like, I can't sleep and I haven't slept for years. Well, I'm taking like the max dose of melatonin, like 15 milligrams, 10 milligrams. Why isn't it working? What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
What is a dose of melatonin people should be taking?
Okay, so this is a little bit of a rant. Okay, so just give me a couple of minutes on this one because I'm going to explain the whole thing to everybody. So number one, people don't know this, but melatonin is actually a hormone. It's not, it's like testosterone or estrogen, and you couldn't walk down to the local, health food store and buy that. And there's a reason, okay? Because hormones affect multiple systems throughout the body. It's not like it's a targeted thing that only does one thing. So that's number one. Number two, many people don't know this. Melatonin is by prescription only in most of Europe, in Australia, and many other countries. So there are other countries that have figured out this is not a great idea for people to self-regulate their melatonin. So we should probably follow suit. Number three, many people don't know this, but melatonin affects birth control, SSRIs, and blood pressure medication. SSRIs, by the way, are antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, because melatonin is not a sleep initiator like Ambien. Melatonin is a sleep regulator. What melatonin does is it tells your brain it's bedtime. That's very different than telling your brain it's time for sleep. It turns out that there are two separate systems in the brain, one called sleep drive, the other called sleep rhythm. Melatonin really only affects rhythm in a major way. There's some data to suggest it can affect sleep drive in certain individuals, but just bear with me on this one. Melatonin really is the rhythm mover, if you will. That's why we use it for jet lag. That's why we use it for shift work. So when we're talking about melatonin, we need it to be for very specific instances as generally spoken. Okay, Michael, that's great, but what's the frickin' dose? So there's data out of MIT would show that the dose in order to get plasma concentration levels up to where we know it has an effect is somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams. What? Somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams, Dr. Breus. I can't find it in anything less than 3, 5, or 10 milligram gummies. Yep, folks, you have now come up against the big problem, which is almost all of melatonin is sold in an overdosage format. The way you know you're overdosed is when you take it. Number one, it doesn't work. Number two, you have crazy dreams. Okay. Those are the two big things. Don't forget, it will affect medications that you could be taking. So it could also change like your heart rate because it changes your blood pressure medication. It could change your birth control. So it can change your hormones. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. Number four, melatonin is not appropriate for children, period, end of story. Most people don't know this, but believe it or not, children make somewhere between 3 and 4 times the amount of melatonin in their brains already. So adding more really doesn't do any good. In fact, what you do is you teach your child that they need a pill to sleep. I don't think there's anything worse than teaching a child that they need a pill to sleep. Okay.
Other
There's
than
no
telling them
universe
to
where
pill
that
to
makes
focus.
right. Exactly. Exactly. Like this is not appropriate any longer. Not when we have better tools, right? Not when we have better mechanisms to be able to help people in a natural, safe, non-side effect kind of way. So I'm very much against melatonin in children. There is, however, one group of children where there's some data that makes a lot of sense, and that's children on the autism spectrum. We have seen that doses in the 3 to 5 milligram range are effective in that group of kids and young adults. To be fair, I don't understand why, but we have seen that there is significant data to show that it is effective. We're just not 100% sure what the mechanism of action might be. So with that, I would tell people as a general guideline, you probably don't need melatonin unless you're jet lagged.
What about when to take it?
Yes, sorry. Thank you for reminding me.
Most people take it like right when they're about to go to bed, and they're like, why isn't this working?
Yeah, bad idea. So if it's in a tablet form, it has to go down your throat, into your belly, mix around, and then come back up. That takes 90 minutes, folks.
Not back up your mouth, back up to your brain.
Thank you. Yes, not back up to your mouth, through your mouth. That would be gastroesophageal reflux, which is a whole different ball game here. We're talking about back up into your brain. It takes 90 minutes if you're taking it in a tablet form. If you want to speed that process up, what I've discovered is you can actually find it in a liquid sublingual form. And if you put it underneath your tongue and you let it sit there, and by the way, you have to let it sit there. You can't just put it in there and swallow. Put it in there and count to 60. That's how you know it's going to get up and in, and it should take about 30 minutes for it to work in that way. So tablet, 90 minutes, tincture, 30 minutes. But again, look at the reasoning why you're taking the melatonin and make sure you're taking it for the appropriate reasons.
Yeah, that's really great and really helpful because, again, you can have the best tools in the world, but if you give them to somebody who doesn't know how to use them, like a bad mechanic, they will break your car. Right. So know how to use the tools, because these tools are really powerful, right? There's so much access to technology and to techniques and pharmaceuticals and over-the-counter stuff, more than we've ever had in the history of human existence. Let's learn how to use this stuff because it's really, really powerful. Yeah. Michael, do you have time for one more question?
Of course.
I want to be respectful of your time because I know how busy you are.
No, we're good, bro.
All right. I'm going to give you one more here. So I think that a common misconception that is often brought to me that I see some people asking about here is this idea about, what is the part of sleep I should care about the most, right? You talked about it as stage 3, stage 4 sleep, which is our physically restorative sleep. Sometimes we think of that as deep or REM sleep, the parts of our sleep state cycle where we are getting what you referred as to physical restoration, but also what we get in the brain, which is memory reconsolidation. So when we get these parts of sleep in from the psychological perspective, this is actually one of the parts of sleep where the stuff we learn during the day gets integrated with all the stuff we learned before today. And then the parts that we want to keep around stick, and the parts that are deemed not that important go away. But what happens when we lose, so first off, what are the most important parts of sleep that we should be focused on, especially for people who use wearable sleep trackers? And for people who don't or do use wearable sleep trackers, why are deep sleep and REM sleep or sleep stage 3 and 4 sleep so important? Sure.
So let's start out with tracking. Okay. So I want to be very clear about people with tracking. All right. There is no tracker that is 100% accurate. And I'm going to explain why. Sleep is an incredibly complicated process. When we have you in a sleep laboratory, I have 27 electrodes all over your body. I have respiratory belts across your chest. I've got a camera watching you. If you think I can get all that information from a ring or a wristband or a watch, you're cuckoo. Okay. And so understand that what's happening in every single tracker is we're measuring certain things and then creating algorithms to teach us what we think that data means inside the sleep cycle. So as an example, we know very consistently that people's heart rate is at different levels during different stages of sleep. One heart rate during deep sleep, very different heart rate during REM sleep. In fact, it's elevated in REM sleep because you're dreaming and your body is doing more stuff. So your heart rate has to be elevated during that period of time. Once the mechanism, whatever it happens to be, looks at said data point, it basically says, okay, we know that heart rates in between this range and this range are probably in this stage of sleep. So we're going to assign this stage of sleep for this 30 seconds or a minute. And then it just keeps going throughout the evening time. That's how trackers basically work. I want to be clear about something. If you wake up in the morning and it says you only got 12 minutes of deep sleep, don't freak out, okay? There's no universe where you only got 12 minutes of deep sleep. And by the way, if it says you only got 12 minutes for multiple days in a row, that's a good sign. Michael, why on earth is that a good sign? Because your tracker is being consistently inaccurate, okay? Here's where you want to look for something. If it says 14 minutes one time and 347 minutes the next and 250 the next, I want to know what happened in those 2 days, because you want to look for the change, or what we call the delta. So I want to be clear, don't focus too hard on any one particular metric that you might be learning about, whether it's through a wristband or a ring. I don't care, but you don't want to get too bogged down by any one particular type of sleep. Now, let's broaden the discussion. Let's talk about the types of sleep and why they're important, okay? As a general rule, stage 3-4 sleep, what we call deep sleep, is your physical restoration, right? So this is like bringing the car into the body shop and hammering out the dents and the dinks and polishing up the scratches and all those kinds of things. Another thing that happens during the early part of stage 3-4 is something called the glymphatic system comes in. I call that the waste management system of the brain, because it comes in and it scoops out all of these really bad proteins that have a tendency to build up inside your brain, called beta amyloid and tau, which we know will wrap around a nerve ending. And that's what we call Alzheimer's and dementia. So we really don't like that. So we want to make sure we're getting good stage 3-4 sleep for 2 reasons. It helps with our physical and it helps clear out our brain, right? REM sleep is our mental restoration. This is what we've discovered is where we move information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory to be able to retrieve information for whatever topic or activity that we want to be able to do. So every single night, your brain has to filter through that, not only those proteins, but it has to say, okay, there's been about 10,000 stimuli that have wandered through this person's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. What do we want to keep? What do we want to throw away? And what's going to be important to add to the hard drive of this unit, right? And that's what happens during stage 3-4. And then during REM, it actually gets transferred. And by the way, we think that the transfer process of moving information from short-term memory to long-term memory is what dreams are a manifestation of, right? And so that's pretty cool when you think about it. It's like
Really cool.
Right? Like, what is my dream? Well, your dream is probably this information transfer that's currently going on. Now, the funny part is that dreams are pretty bizarre sometimes. And it's because, to be fair, in a lot of cases, we can't actually track it too well. So all this information comes through the door. How does our brain react? So as an example, if you have a dream where you walk downstairs in your kitchen and your dog is eating a bowl of spaghetti at the kitchen table with your 2nd grade teacher, and you wonder, and you're sitting here saying to yourself, this is the most bizarre dream ever. Here's what probably happened. You probably had Italian food last night for dinner, right? Your dog jumped on your bed in the middle of the night. And you want to remember to keep the dog locked out of the bedroom. And your 2nd grader who was having dinner with you was probably talking about their teacher. And that's how all that information ended up inside your dream. So our brains aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it does a generally good job. So when you're looking on these trackers and you're looking at these things, you really want to look at deep sleep and REM sleep are the 2 big things that we're looking for. And as far as amounts are concerned, you want to see roughly 20 to 25% of each one across the night. The other 50% of the night is made up of light sleep, stage 2, stage 1, awakenings, things of that nature as a general guideline. But once again, don't freak out if you've got no deep sleep, okay? Because that's probably a malfunction of the device, because nobody has no deep sleep.
Yeah, or in the case of the Oura Ring, which is my favorite sleep tracker, you know, if I drink too much water or eat too much salt or too little salt, then my fingers will swell or get thinner. And if my ring is fit loosely on me, then it's going to incorrectly measure my deep and REM sleep, right? Because it's not getting the data as it normally would. And the same with the watch. You know, if your Apple Watch is on too loose or too tight, that has a direct impact on the quality of the repeated measurements that you're getting. So as Michael was saying, I think this is really, really important for any wearable tracker user. It's about the trends, right? It's about how do you understand that over the course of not day to day even, but week to week or month to month,
Yes.
am I going down in my deep and REM sleep, or am I going up? And if I'm going down week over week, month over month, then there's probably something that I need to address in my day-to-day life, or in my diet, or in my sleep habits, or in my rhythm, that could actually switch that around so that it starts to trend the way you want it to go.
Right. And by the way, if it's just stable, that could be good too, right? Because of the inaccuracy, it's just a level of stability. So it's really, when you start to see things going down, that's when you want to throw up, not necessarily a red flag, maybe a yellow flag of, hey, I need to take a look at this. So I'm going to track this for the next 60 days and see what happens. And I've had that happen to me too, Dave. Although I'll tell you, when my hands swell, when I travel. So like air travel, I know you just got back from a couple of big trips. Like I can almost not pull my rings off my fingers. And sometimes I have to take my rings off before I even get on an airplane, because my hands will have a tendency to swell during that period of time as well. So, you know, and that obviously can affect, because I use the Oura Ring as well, that can obviously affect, you know, the tracker's ability to track accurately.
Yeah, well said. Well, Michael, I just want to thank you again. I am so grateful that you
That was it, dude. We could go forever. We're having a great time.
I know. I especially want to, I am definitely going to come back with you to do this again, to talk about dreams, because when I grew up, you know, dreams were some of the things that fascinated me the most, because as a kid, and probably like most of us, right, we have these incredibly vivid dreams, and where we often, I mean, I don't think this experience was unique to me, but there were times where I would wake up and I would be in a conversation later that day, and I'd be talking to somebody, and I would reference an interaction we had in a dream, and they'd be like, "What are you talking about?" And I'd be like, "Oh my God, wait, you weren't actually there, right? That was something that happened last night in my head." I'm like, how is it possible that it could feel so real when I'm asking people about it? And then I would ask people, you know, I'd ask my parents, I'd ask the experts, you know, and I'd say, "Hey, what are these dream things that I'm experiencing?" And they're like, you know, they don't necessarily know. They're just like, "Oh, well, that's not real. Don't worry about it," right? Because you don't want to scare a kid when you have nightmares. You know, you don't want to make them think like, "Oh, what you're experiencing is something real. It's that scary," but it certainly feels scary, and it certainly feels real. And sometimes it feels really fun too. And I think that's always been an area of excitement and interest for me, is to try to understand, you know, well, what is happening in our brains and bodies when we're experiencing these dreams? What happens when our memories from the day get integrated into our memories from the rest of our lives? And what does that look and feel like, right? How does that impact our sleep?
Yeah, and our emotions, right? Because remember, dreaming is a lot of times where emotional processing is occurring. And so getting through some things, remember, a nightmare is a situation where you wake up from a dream where you've been processing something emotionally, and you can't handle it anymore. And so you wake up, and then that processing stops, right? And there's a whole therapeutic group called dream therapists, not dream interpreters, which is bullshit, but dream therapy, which is real, is out there. And these are people who are trained, Jungian trained, like very much understand. It's fascinating work, and it's good work that's getting done. So, you know, there's a lot to talk about with dreams. Also, I think there's a whole area we can be talking about with things like PTSD, and how Apollo can be effective there, and some of the new things we're learning there. Then, of course, there's always sleep, and all the great new things that we're learning about that. So anytime you want me back, Dr. Dave, I'm in, brother.
I love it. And we'd love to have you back. And, you know, I think that this really sets a stage for our next conversation, which is really about, I think, something that you and I talk about a lot, but doesn't come out to the general public in conversation very much in the sleep context, which is safety, right? And how critical it is for us to feel safe when we're entering our literally most physically vulnerable state of being that we are expected to be in like a third of our lives, where we're physically completely defenseless, right? Our guard is down. You know, we might even be paralyzed in REM physically, in REM sleep. We're certainly not able to react quickly if a threat comes around. And so our bodies shut that stuff down when we might be in threat, which could be emotional, physical, mental. There's lots of things that could make us feel that way.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, and we're going to have that discussion. And we've actually, you and I have had that discussion before about safety and the importance of safety when it comes to sleep, as it is such a vulnerable position. So heck yeah, I'm coming back, whether you want it or not. We're going to come back here and start chit chatting some more, and get some people interested. So I'm excited.
Well, thank you again, Michael. It's always a pleasure. I'm so
Of course.
grateful for your time, and send my love to your fam over there in LA.
I will indeed. I will indeed. Also tell Kat I said hello, and the whole crew over at Apollo. You know, I love everybody there. We had such a great time at the Biohacker Conference. I don't know if any of you were out there, but Diamond Dave and I were up on stage talking biohacking and Apollo, and we had a blast at the Biohacker Conference. So we'll probably be there again next year. So come by, swing by the booth, come see us, or come see us lecture. We'd love that. We'd love to hang out.
Yeah, love it. Thanks again, Michael. Take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Peace, guys. Have a good one.
Take care. Sweet dreams.